gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me, as always, Nathan Bartleball. Nathan, what's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing really well, Nathan. It doesn't feel like a month has gone by, but a month has gone by.
It has indeed. We are, we are trucking along with this podcast as well as our isolation statuses, and we're moving right along here. And it was interesting because I had logged in this morning for school. We have a teachers' devotional meeting every day. And one of the things that we were doing today was just kind of going around and expressing the things that we're thankful for during this time, because it can be a little depressing at times to look at where we are and how things are going. And, one of the things that I mentioned was I feel like I have more time to connect with people than I ever have before. More intentional about making phone calls, more intentional about trying to virtually get together with people. I know for you and I, Nathan, to try to get together, physically get together, or even, try to connect to do anything before this, it was just difficult with our schedules, but we're a little more flexible throughout our day
5 minutes
now.
Away from each other.
I know. But the busyness of life sets in, and that's one of the things that I've been grateful for, is I feel that life has slowed down in some respects. By necessity, you can't go out and do things now, which I know can be a little maddening and stir crazy. But I have been able to develop relationships with people that it was difficult to do before. So I'm very thankful for that and that opportunity. And you and I, Nathan, have some big plans moving forward with the podcast and what we're going to do. And before we get into some of those, what I want to do is make an announcement for next week. We're going to do an AMA, Ask Me Anything. We are going to have one senior Greg Dutcher on. He was supposed to be on this week, but something came up where I think he fell asleep, or he was binge watching Breaking Bad again or something like that. No, I'm kidding. He's been doing so much more talking and recording talking that he actually had lost his voice. And so he was like, sorry guys.
I heard he got a Clorox martini and he's all better.
That's right. That's right. So he said that he is pumped to join us next week. And so we're going to do an AMA with one Greg Dutcher next week. So we're going to start promoting this and hyping this up the rest of this week into next Thursday. Send us your questions. Send us the questions that you have. They can be questions for Nathan, or Greg, or they could be questions for all three. So let us know what you want to find out about each one of us, and we will go ahead and rock that. And so, like I said, Nathan, just very brief word on that. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, yeah. Ask any questions you want to know about us, or questions in general, or if you really just want to play, can you stump Nathan by mentioning a movie he's never heard of? Try.
Which Nathan?
Either one of us.
I feel like you've got me beat in that category, particularly. Oh, do you know what we should do, Nathan? We should do stump you, not just with the movie, but the year. I feel like that would be a good one.
Release date. I don't know if you were around. We were playing something, and somebody was like, mentioned something like the movie Leprechaun, and I came within like 2 days of the release date.
Nice.
I think it was even horrifying to myself. And somebody was like, "That movie came to a movie theater."
Warwick Davis, baby, Warwick Davis.
It would be intriguing to see that. And I promise you. See, the problem is how will they know if we're putting them on? But
that's right.
What you can do is you can hold it and not tell me.
Yes.
I promise not to look at IMDb. What would be the point? I mean, it's
I know.
a completely useless trick.
That's right.
No one's going to be hiring me for anything. No, but anything at all. And again, if there are any, anything. And if there are questions, I know that Jared shared a question about a week ago on the page, and we were going to bring Greg on and kind of talk about that generally. But we're going to probably kind of build that into this AMA. So if you have questions, whether they fall within the theological Christian perspective, or if they are related to books, movies, anything that we've talked about on the podcast, anything we haven't talked about, I'd really say I'm pretty much an open book until I'm not. So if your question is,
I'm open till I'm closed.
I will promptly ignore it.
That's right. Very nice.
No, but I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a fun way to kind of connect with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing we want to announce, and the reason why we want to announce it now is, like I said, we've got some plans for moving forward, some good ideas for things we want to do. And the reason why we're announcing it now is because we want to give time for our listeners to prepare. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we want to give them time to prepare. But the general idea, and Nathan, this was something that you and I have kind of toyed around with, I think, over the years a little bit. But you had been thinking a little bit more about it recently and what we could do with this. And so I want to go ahead and turn it over to you to let you talk it up a little bit and let them know what's going on. And then we'll kind of give the big reveal of what we're going to do when we come to the end.
Yeah, and so we are still, as far as These Go to 11, we are still committed to doing episodes just about anything, and particularly continuing to try to find episodes that allow us to explore and talk about those things that matter to us from a spiritual, theological perspective and all of that. I know that this show and Pop Culture Ninja, and then when Zach was on, that there were lots of times where we talked about TV shows, we talked about movies and things like that. And I think that one of the things you and I realize is it would be really nice to be able to kind of focus in and not just focus in on a topic, but to focus in on something very specific within some of the, we've had episodes where we talk about movies. We did something where we kind of talked, we've talked about Picard, Star Wars, and all these things. That would be interesting to hone in on maybe one thing at a time, one book, one movie, one piece of music, one artist, something like that, and do that in such a way that it really became a group community sort of thing, that a discussion. So there's enough time for the listeners to hear or see or participate in whatever it is that we were going to discuss. And not unlike I think that the place I've seen it done here on These Go to 11 was really when you wanted to do an episode for Avatar: The Last Airbender,
yep.
And there were suddenly a lot of people who kind of came out and oh, we're really interested in this, and it allowed there to be enough time. And one of the things we've been talking about, I let you talk to maybe more the technical aspects of it, Nathan, but we want to set up ways where there's ability to discuss this in the discussion boards.
Yes,
you can send us emails, but we also want to set up a way where we can. We've played with ideas maybe for the podcast as a whole to be able to have call in. So far, it seems like the only person who's ever able to call in is the Reverend James King. I don't know what number he's got, but he's got the number nobody else has. So that's one thing we've been talking, and I feel like that's maybe more about the podcast in general, to be able to leave calls and we can listen and even share. But there's another way that we're looking at potentially doing that, and I thought that the idea of being able to take one thing, whether that be something brand new that maybe not a lot of us have experienced, so it gives us time to experience it, or coming back to things. I've realized in quarantine there's a lot of things that I haven't revisited in several years that I'm revisiting and finding, oh, wow, this is almost new in some ways to me. It happens a lot to me now because I have kids, and so if it's something I can share with them, I'm constantly seeing it through their eyes. And so I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there that maybe there's new stuff that I don't think some of us have ever tried before. Within reason, of course, again, no Clorox martinis, but there are things that I think, there are books, movies, and even art and music that I haven't engaged with, not so much because I have an issue with it or wouldn't, but it just sort of fell to a blind spot, But then there are things that I'm intimately familiar with that I'm so close to them, but maybe I haven't visited in a while, that my thinking has probably become what general thinking is, the general feel for it. There's a general feeling about what this piece of art or this piece of, whatever it is, how we think about it is based maybe largely over how the group in general feels about it. The group meaning people at large. Yeah. And sometimes, particularly as Christians, there are things that are considered good Christian art or good art that's good for Christians and things like that. And I think over time, it's not that isn't maybe a true statement, but we take them for granted. Maybe we haven't really looked at them in a while. So I thought it would be fun to do that. And then you and I were talking about what would be the best place to start, and I think that trying something with a bit of a level playing field, maybe something that people have revisited it before, but maybe there's enough time for them to revisit it again, give you and I some time to revisit it again. And so I will leave that to you to share specifically, but I think this is one of the things going forward. This will not be the every single episode format of the show, but it is something that we want to do and continue with as a regular series, maybe in every other one kind of thing. Is that about right, Nathan?
Yeah, that sounds right. And so where we wanted to start with this was actually The Lord of the Rings, because as you said, Nathan, it's a book that you're familiar with, but it's been a little bit since you visited. I think you said about 6 years ago is probably the last time you've read through them. And then you just rewatched the movies with your children recently. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give you, our listeners, 2 weeks, essentially to, go back through the book and watch the movie. And I am not a particularly fast reader, but one thing that I can say is that I was able to get through the book and the movie because I've done this within the past couple years, and I was able to do that within about 2 weeks. And again, that's not being a particularly fast reader. And Nathan, you and I are going to go ahead and we're going to discuss this. We're going to discuss the book. We're going to discuss the movie. We're going to look at this from that perspective. And so the reason why we're kind of bringing this up and saying this is because what we would like to do is we want to then set up a Zoom page. I have a Zoom account, and so I will put that information out there on the discussion board post when we get closer. And we want to have and bring in our listeners to interact with us on this as well. So we are going to go ahead and in 2 weeks, which is going to be May something. Is that April or May? I don't know.
It's a May something. You're right about that.
It's May something. And so what'll happen is, Nathan, you and I will go ahead and we'll do the podcast, and we will discuss it and we will talk about it. And we're going to invite the listeners to listen in on that. And then the following week, we're going to dedicate our podcast to opening up this Zoom meeting and to doing a discussion with our listeners on it. Things that maybe we didn't consider or think about as we did the podcast. Maybe we brought something up that we really enjoyed with the movie versus the book, or vice versa, and you didn't like it. And so we're going to invite you in on that discussion afterwards. And like Nathan said, we're not going to be doing these every week, but what we will do is we will go ahead and kind of do The Lord of the Rings when we do these, and then we'll move on to something else a little later. So I think it would probably be fairly safe to say that if we were to capture this Lord of the Rings kind of Middle Earth theme, between now and I would put it out there and say, by the beginning of fall, maybe we'll go ahead and encompass the series by that point. Maybe a little longer. It'll depend. If we're having a great time with this and we're drawing it out, we're not going to be bound by, a time limit or anything like that. But I would think, maybe around fall we'll kind of wrap it up, and then we'll kind of move into that winter Christmassy theme and maybe do something for Christmas. And so that's really what we're looking to do. We're looking to engage the listeners in a new way using a new format. I'm becoming more and more proficient with Zoom as I'm teaching classes live with Zoom. And so I think it would be fun for our listeners to just come in and join us in this discussion that we're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. And I think, we have that open ability to adjust or modify depending. I think that we had talked about a couple of different ways, and I think that this we're open to feedback as well in terms of what the best way to tackle it was. We definitely wanted to not do all 3 books at one time.
Right.
We wanted to allow time. Again, 2 weeks might not be a lot of time to read it. The first book is not terribly huge in terms of the commitment, I think. And then to we would do the first episode, and if someone really wasn't able to read it, but you still want to be able to participate in it, there's time to sort of read that. You can even hold listening to the episode that we talk about it off a little bit. So we wanted to provide enough buffer in there that there's a little bit more than 2 weeks before you would actually need to, if you wanted to participate in the Zoom discussion, you'd have extra time.
Yes, exactly. So,
and,
in 2 weeks, Nathan and I will be kind of talking about our thoughts and discussing it. And then in 3 weeks, that's when we would host the Zoom discussion. So really, you would have 3 weeks to kind of catch up and talk, or to catch up with, the book and what we're doing, and work into that frame and into what we would like to do.
And one of the things I'd say with this is as we go through it, I really want to be able to look at it from all facets. Again, not just there's little reason I think to kind of review it in a traditional way, because most of us, I know for myself, Nathan, you and I have talked about this before and on the podcast, we have a lot of respect for the work that Tolkien created, this one in particular, and trying to point out this is good and that's not good,
right.
That's been a lot of been there, done that. So I think trying to look at how does this story resonate with us now? Does it say anything different to us than it said before? Honestly, does it say anything different to us now than it did a month ago?
Right. Yeah.
And that may be the case. And I also would say that it is sort of, to me anyway, even as a critic, I always try to be in the respectful camp when I'm looking at something. But I would also say that this can be a sort of not use the term no holds barred, but use the term sort of there's not a necessity, I think, in this. I don't want us to come to this and necessarily treat something with kid gloves because it is considered a classic,
Yeah.
I think that we aren't necessarily doing it any favors, that we are able to get in there and analyze it and point out the good and the bad, and to discuss what works for us, what doesn't. And honestly, I would love to hear dissenting opinions, if there are feelings about it that are what we don't normally hear. That's kind of what I'd like to see come from this, to really be discussed, and the questions that come up about, this story and what does it mean? It doesn't have any kind of greater resonance or significance. There are some that would say it does. There's some that would say it doesn't. And then even if there are works that kind of have played off of it, because certainly there have been a lot of novels and stories that have sprung from what Tolkien did. Obviously, and honestly, a lot of what we consider the fantasy or high fantasy genre directly, in a lot of ways, grew out of this seed.
Yes.
This Tolkien's particular world. Now, there was European fantasy and mythology and folklore, but when it's sort of being taken and developed and streamlined into the thing that it became, I do think that Tolkien plays a kind of singular role in that genesis.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to talk about all that, but I also want to be able to talk about some of the authors that sprung off from him and things like that. Again, it won't be massive or titanic, and we wanted to tackle each book separately, I think, because particularly with the way that it falls out in terms of the movies. Not that the movies are essential, but the main thing I realized when rewatching the movies with my kids is that they are very different from the books.
Yes.
And not different in a way that it dilutes them or would automatically make them not good. They are just a very different experience. They have been designed as a different experience. And so being able to kind of talk about them separately from the book, I think that we plan to spend most of our time discussing the book, but then being able to look at the movies as well. So any thoughts you have about those? And as we go along, too, I try to see what I can dig up. I know that Amazon is working on a new series. I'm still not entirely clear where all of that falls. So it'll be fun to talk about those things, but I would say that we don't want it to just be, facts that anybody could read on a Wikipedia page. We'd really like this to be an interesting exploration that helps us maybe delve into the book in a way we hadn't before, or delve into this story in a way we hadn't before, and also kind of learn a little bit more about each other and how we, we digest and process these things. That's sort of always what I want to do with Pop Culture Ninja. I think that we never quite got to a point where we could do that. This Zoom meeting idea, I think, is really kind of intriguing to me to see if we can pull this off with a little more interaction with our listeners.
Yep, absolutely. So we're definitely looking forward to that, and Nathan and I will be talking and communicating over the next couple weeks, and really trying to make this a good experience. Those of you who've been around for a long time, when these go to 11 did their 1 year anniversary. It was an interesting disaster. We had a blast in the studio. We had a great time, but we were trying to live interact, and that was much more difficult at that time. We just weren't set up and prepared for it. But now I think we have a good format and a good medium to being set up and ready to do this. And so we have some good thoughts and ideas on how we're going to make this work and make this happen. And so, we're gonna try to pull this off and see what goes. So, looking forward to it. Today, we had talked about being just a little bit of a shorter one. We wanted to go ahead and get that announcement out there about Greg for next week and about the Lord of the Rings, particularly. Don't forget, we're just taking this one at a time. So, the Fellowship of the Ring is what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks. And then in 3 weeks, we're going to be inviting you, the listeners, to come on. So we're going to be hitting the discussion board post a little bit harder, reminding everybody about the AMA and about the discussion that we're going to be having. So jump on in that. Let's get some hype and let's get some excitement going for this.
Yeah, the other thing is I'd also like to place somewhere on the discussion board or on the site a place where you can also suggest anything you'd like to see us do this with in the future. So once that we're done with Lord of the Rings, we do want to hear about suggestions about, again, books, movies, series, whatever, that you would like to see kind of take a deep dive. I think that's really what this is about. Yeah. Into. And so we'll put a place up, a thread up there where you can kind of throw that out. We're definitely going to go forward with this one first. I thought it would be good because it is something that I think a lot of people are familiar with, that a lot of people, probably take a little bit for granted and have things to say. And I'm hoping that maybe some of the things we have to say or some of the things we have to think are maybe a little different than we thought they were when we come back on the other side of it. So anything that you can think of like that, or maybe something you just have always loved and you want other people to kind of experience and be able to interact with them about it, throw it in there. We will look at all these things and we will continue. We're hoping that if this is successful, we'll continue to pick things and do that. And so that'll be one way that we can kind of keep some interesting interconnectivity with some of the episodes.
Yep, absolutely. So, well, I really didn't have anything else for today, Nathan. That was pretty much what I had. Did you have any kind of closing thoughts or remarks?
No, the only thing I would throw out is like when we're talking about other suggestions, that doesn't have to be limited to fiction, to books or to fiction books. It can really be anything. And with the AMA too, there may be questions that you guys throw out that we find. Feel free to make them big questions. They can be existential questions if that's the case, or really big ones. And if they're really big, in some cases, it may turn out that we will acknowledge them on the show next week. But we may actually look at one of those and say, you know what, this is better suited to an episode.
Yeah.
And we will handle it that way and really give it its due. So, and the same thing would be true. If we put some suggestion out there that we look at and say, hey, you know what, this might be better outside the context of this format. We're going to look at everything and we're going to seriously consider everything. And, we really want to have that communication with you. So, any ideas that we find and that are interesting to do, we'll find a way to do them. So,
yep, absolutely. So, all right, good deal. Well, until next time, Nathan, we just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.